Jazz Notes Podcast. I'm Ben Anderson.
I'm Chandler Holt.
We're recording this on January, February, March, April. I always have to look at what 4 means. The 16th. The season is over. I haven't known what day of the week it is since Halloween. It's just where your brain is when you're covering the NBA. There's just not really off days. And because the Jazz also played a lot of Sundays this year, like things got wonky. So I have figured out the month. It is April 16th. We are 2 days removed from the final Jazz game of the 2023-2024 campaign. The Jazz finished with a record of 31-51. As always, find us on Twitter at KSL Sports, at Ben's Hoops, at Chandler Holt KSL. We will go through our normal podcast with some variations, with it being the last game in the last week of the regular season now behind us. We will look a bigger picture back on some of the things we do over the last week, but still kind of break down game by game. But we will take a big look forward at the Utah Jazz offseason, talk about some major pieces of news that have come down really even in the last hours with Danny Ainge talking to the media for the first time since before the season, and more. Plus, we'll get to the mailbag, which we got a lot of mailbag questions, so excited to do that. All right, Chandler, let's start, I guess, with the last week like we usually do.
Yeah, we have a lot of all-encompassing season talks and even preview talks for the offseason, but let's get started with the last week for the Jazz. There was a 13-game losing streak to end the season, and a lot of fans were wondering, is there going to be a win? We got 2 of them, and it almost ended up hurting the Jazz at the end. But yeah, 2-2 week started with a 111-95 loss to Denver, followed up with a 124-121 win over Houston. Then followed that with a win over Los Angeles, 110-109, and then last game of the season in Golden State, a 123-116 loss.
I tweeted, and I wrote a story after the Clippers win that, like, hey, they didn't want that win. That was a bad win. Yeah. You didn't want to do that. You really put the odds of finishing outright with the 8th seed in danger, because what if Golden State doesn't play anybody? And they started some of their players. They didn't play Steph or Draymond. And then the second half, they pulled everybody. Very similar to what the Clippers did. And I thought, hey, if Keontae goes on a heater, which he did, you're going to win this game, and you're going to end up tied with the Nets, which is going to pick that's going to go to the Rockets, for the best odds to move up in the lottery, or just a coin toss to figure out 8th or 9th. And I got some blowback on Twitter being like, oh, this draft doesn't matter. Guys, they all matter.
Yep.
Every pick matters. The 3 percentage points that you get from having a 26% chance of moving up in the lottery versus the 23 you would have had if you had to share it with the Nets to move up, that matters. Like, if you could improve everywhere in your franchise 3%, every player 3%, every win 3%, every basket 3%, you would take it. Don't mess with opportunities to get better. It would have been idiotic for the Utah Jazz to win that last game. Will Hardy realized it. He knew that was the mandate. He pulled Keontae George off the floor. He pulled Kenneth Lofton off the floor, which is, by the way, Kenneth Lofton is the reason the Jazz beat both Houston and the Clippers.
Yes.
And he said, that guy's too good. We can't play him. It's got to be Bryce Sensabaugh making a lot of difficult decisions late in the game, and he messed him up. And that's not on Bryce Sensabaugh. I mean, it is, but he's a rookie never playing that position, and the Jazz said, yeah, we want him to mess it up and we want to lose this game. They didn't challenge a call that obviously was a bad call because they weren't trying to win, and they end up with the eighth pick, at least the 8th best odds of moving up in the lottery, and that will be held on May 12th. We'll talk about some of the important dates in the offseason coming up, but so overall, and we'll get to this in our weekly grades, so we'll really do a big picture yearly grades. Good week for the Jazz.
Yes.
You locked up the 8th best chances of moving up in the lottery. You really didn't have a chance to catch Memphis. They lost too many games. They never even made it available. You wouldn't have gotten there even if you hadn't beat Houston or Los Angeles. So they recognized what they needed to do, and they got it done. Tip of the hat. It's not fun. It's an ugly part of basketball. It's a stupid part of the NBA, but it is the NBA, and that's what you have to do, and they did it.
You said that Lofton was the reason they won that game, specifically the game against the Clippers. He puts up 27, 9, and 8.
Yep.
Like, maybe the best player on the floor for the entire game.
We know he scored 42 for the Grizzlies in their last game of the season last year. Actually got outdone. Gigi Jackson scored 44 this year in their season finale. So Kenneth Lofton no longer has the rookie scoring record for the Grizzlies, unfortunately. No, man, Kenneth is good. We got a question about him in the mailbag we'll address. But, yeah, he is too good of a player to lose games. He's I called him the anti-tank gun. He's fun to watch. But pulled him off the floor to lose to Golden State, and it worked.
You want to get into the Jazz grades?
Yeah, let's do it, and then we can get into some weekly news. Let's do end-of-season Jazz grades. Okay. This is big. I'm not trying to skip over this, but, we are here. We've seen 82 games, 51 losses for the Utah Jazz this season. Where do we want to start?
Let's just start with the veterans. We can get that out of the way. It was sort of the young players were the big picture for the Jazz this year, but Lauri Markkanen still had a pretty good season. He put up, 23 and 8 about a game on almost 50, 40, 90 shooting splits. He was right under in all three of those categories. Jordan Clarkson didn't play for what felt like the majority of the second half of the year, but he did his Jordan Clarkson things. And then honestly, a lot of the other good veteran performances came from players no longer on the Jazz, Simone Fontecchio and Kelly Olynyk. I'm thinking like a B- grade for the vets.
I think Lowry took a step back, which hurts. I mean, he was better last year than he was this year. His three-point shooting was better this season. He took more. He made more. His shooting from the floor was worse. He played fewer games. His rebounding dropped. His assists were up, but not enough to be noticeable. I thought his defense was a lot worse.
Yeah.
Now the Jazz just were worse defensively overall. Colin was much better, like way better. Colin had a huge season. I don't think any question he was the Jazz's second best player this year and was really good. So maybe that makes up for what Lowry did last year. Jordan was worse this year than last year. Chris Dunn was fine. Yeah, I'm just going to say B-.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's fine with me. B-, C+, right in that range. Lowry's great. Lowry's a really good player. He's one that you want to have on your roster long term. I would not explore getting rid of Lowry Markkanen this offseason, barring a crazy trade that has, can't miss young players. And I don't think that's happening. So, I'll say B- because of how well Colin Sexton played. And the truth is, with all due respect, the rest of the veterans don't matter.
No.
Like, the guys that matter are Lowry and Colin. Lowry's really good. Colin was a lot better. That's enough to get you in the B range, but because Lowry took not a step back, but didn't, jump to 28, 29, which I thought was possible, I'll give him a B-.
Next up, the young guys. Now, none of the rookies had a Victor Wembanyama or even Luka Doncic, Trae Young type rookie season, but I think that they all showed in their own way a lot of potential. Keontae George, we'll get into this with some postseason awards. He was my rookie of the year. I think that's no debate there.
Yeah.
And then Hendricks, he showed that he's going to be a two-way player in this league at the very least for a long time to come. If not, maybe get up to that borderline all-star. Jonathan Isaac can really affect the floor a lot on both ends. I gave the young players, I was between B and B+.
Before the season, if you had said they have three guys who I think are NBA players, I would have been like, oh, A+.
Yep.
Yeah, A+. And I do think these three are NBA players. Now, how long does Bryce play? He has to really improve. Is Keontae George's shooting going to improve? We'll talk about that in the mailbag. Taylor Hendricks, how far away is he? What position is he going to play? Like, those guys are all still probably a couple years away from really being big-time players, but I think they hit on all three. There's nobody who I'm just like, that guy doesn't have a chance.
Yeah.
And you see that. There are players in this rookie season already who were first-year players. You're like, oh, he's never going to play. He doesn't have it. So in that sense, it's an A. Because they didn't get an all-star, maybe you can't give them an A+. So honestly, I'm going to say A-. Like, that was really good. That was what you had to do.
Yep.
You had the 9th pick, the 16th pick, and the 28th pick or 27th pick, whatever, 28th. Great. Take that. You would have taken hitting all three players, especially the 16th pick being as good as Keontae George was. I think he's going to make an all rookie team. So I'll say A-. Yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but based off their rookie season alone, A-.
And on top of that, some two-way players like Kenny Lofton and Jason Preston showed that they are NBA players as well, Johnny Juzang. So yeah, I think A-, B+ is good there. Next up, standings.
Oh, and you know where we can hurt them actually, and maybe we need to ding them, and maybe I'll drop my grade, is that Walker Kessler had a bad year.
True.
Walker Kessler was not good this year. Some of it was playing time, some of it was fit, some of it seemed like buy-in or mentality, and I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what those are. Will Hardy talked about it in his end-of-season press conference. He said, Walker really overachieved his rookie year and really didn't play as well as he wanted to his second year. So it's like a 500 basketball team. And it really depends on, did they go 0-2 and then 2-2 and they sit at 2-2 and win their next two and sit at 2-2 on the season? Or did they start out 2-0 and then lose their next two and then they're 2-2 and you're like, oh, that's not as good.
Yeah.
He said he would be happy with where Walker Kessler is after his second season if he knew this is the point he would be at, regardless of like the context of how he got here. So I think that's fair. But Walker took a step back this season. So I'm actually going to drop to a B+, because Walker did not jump into this conversation of being the second best player on the team, which was a huge debate for us before the season started.
Next up, standings, and we can look at this as sort of just like overall performance throughout the year. This is maybe going to be a bit controversial. I gave him an A because before the season, we were looking at this team and we were like, I think we named 11 or 12 Western Conference teams that were like, okay, they have more talent than the Jazz. So I think more or less we expected that they were not going to be in the postseason picture, even though when they were 26-26 on the season and had that super hot stretch earlier in the year, we were like, okay, they could do it. But I think that the Jazz are not at a point yet where they are going to be competing for anything, even if they made the postseason, just with their roster. So I think that the fact that they decided to tank note at the end of the season and get a high lottery pick, I think that was the best decision.
What would have been a failing grade for the Jazz for you?
I think if they finished somewhere between 10 and 14, even if they just made the play-in and then got bumped out of the play-in, I think that would be worst case scenario.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you had finished 11 and your pick went to OKC, and you're like, okay, well, you probably in that situation had to hold on to both Kelly Olynyk and Simone Fontecchio to get there, and they're gone, and like you're not paying a 32-year-old or a 33-year-old or a 29-year-old Simone Fontecchio $35 million to hang around, and then you didn't get your pick, like that would have been an F. That really would have been an F. So you get to 8, maybe this jumps up to an A+ if you still found a way to win games through the first half of the season and then move up in the lottery. Okay, that's an A+.
Yeah.
You're not there yet. You're not top 5. Danny Ainge said in his postseason comments that there's some guys in the draft that he likes. He doesn't know if they're going to be there at 8 or wherever the Jazz are drafting. That's an issue. So I'm going to give them a B-.
Okay.
Again, I know it's pretty middling. They did a lot of hard work at the end of the year to get back into the lottery and have a 1 in 4 chance of moving up to the top 4. That's fine. And they didn't flush the entire season. And this is a bad year to flush the entire season. This is not the draft to flush the year.
True.
You should have done it last year or you should do it next year. They didn't do it last year, so you can't do it this year. And if you didn't do it this year, I don't think you can do it next year. So 8, fine. Chance to go up to A+ if they move up into the top 4, and a chance to be a D if they don't draft anyone good.
Yes.
So at this point, I will put it in the middle and I'll say B-.
Next up, fun factor. Very interesting season. There were some really high highs and some really low lows. Like we said, Keontae, like the young guys, specifically Keontae George, were basically the story of the year. He had some really good moments. Laurie had some really good moments. I had it at a C+ though.
Horrendous final 30 games of the season. They go 5-25, maybe the least enjoyable stretch I've ever seen the Jazz play. Fans, I know, were way out on it. So the fans hated that. I do think the fans had a lot of fun. It's easy to forget. Like January was great though. Late December through early January when they went 15-4, like fans really liked that. And then they were really excited about Keontae George, and then he struggled late in the year, and they kind of backed off. But so I'm going to give. What grade did you give him?
C+.
I'll go C.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go with C. The last half was as bad as it's ever been.
Yep.
First half was fine. So it's a middling grade, and we know why they did it. It wasn't like this was an unexpected run for the Jazz. Before the year, we listed out Jazz could be better this year and still have 11 teams in the West better than they are.
Yep.
And that's not accounting for Memphis falling off like they did, So, C for me as far as this season goes. Not great, but probably productive. They did some yeoman's work this year to get the young guys an opportunity and another draft pick.
All right, let's get into the weekly news. First up, as we mentioned earlier, the Jazz clinched the 8th best lottery odds. They have a 6% chance to jump all the way up to number 1, and 1 through 4 have a 26.2% chance.
Great. You're not conveying the pick, like a 0.4% chance of the pick going to OKC. It's not going to happen. Much better odds that you draft top 4 than dropping to 10 all the way. Slightly better chance, right, that you drop to 9.
Mm-hmm.
But fine.
Yeah.
You got another top 10 pick. The Jazz are at such a massive talent discrepancy compared to where they need to be competing for a title. And the easiest way to get that is to have draft picks and hope to hit on some of those draft picks. And obviously, the higher you are in the draft, the better chance you have to get a star or somebody who's going to make a difference. So that's what you're looking for. Danny Ainge did say that he doesn't see the team coming in with 6 players under 20 next year. So they've got 3 draft picks. Do they package those to move up? I could see that very realistically. And this might be the draft where last year that wasn't happening because, the top 8-9 players were so well defined.
Yep.
This year, that might be different. You might be able to move from 8 to 6 with the 28th pick and the 31st pick, and the Jazz might be like, great.
Yep.
Yeah, like, we actually don't want to make all these picks, or we'll kick them down the road, or maybe you only include 1 to move from 8 to 6, but I could see that happening.
Speaking of Danny Ainge comments, we'll get into a lot more of those in a second, but first up, he sort of previewed the Summer League roster. On it, we have Walker Kessler, the 3 rookies, Kenneth Lofton, Darius Baisley, possibly Johnny Juzang, whatever new rookie or rookies the Jazz take, and Jason Preston.
Hang the banner.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Keontae was good last year. Keontae was going to be the MVP before he hurt his ankle in that 3rd to last game, 4th to last game. So you add Kenneth Lofton Jr., who's going to average 80 points a game, and Bryce, who's going to average 80 points a game. Like, you're going to be the first team ever. It's going to be the All-Star game.
Shaq and Kobe.
Yeah, they're going to score 200 points a game. No, honestly, like that team's going to, like Victor's not going to play. Chet's not going to play. So you're going to see this young Jazz roster. Not that that matters, but yeah, that's going to be an unbeatable team. I don't know what to tell you. And the thing is, like, Keontae doesn't play every game.
Yeah.
Taylor might. Bryce will. Kenneth Lofton might. Darius Baisley won't. So, but that's fun. Yeah, have something to watch. Jazz have had some pretty bare rosters historically in the summer league, and I think putting Walker out there is really good. I know some people might be like, "Oh, that's an insult." Remember, he was hurt his first year, so he didn't get to play with the Jazz after the trade from the Timberwolves. He had a toe issue. Played in FIBA last year, hardly played at all. Like, he needs this, and you know what would be awesome for Walker? Go have a huge summer league, kick everybody's butt, get some momentum, and come into the year ready to play. Like, that's what you need. You need to go out there and dominate and be like, "Yeah, I absolutely belong. This is fun. I can win. I can help a team. I can go out and get a 20-point, 20-rebound game in the summer league." And maybe he barely plays in Vegas, but like, I think one of the hard things about FIBA for him was he was cast in being like with all these old players. And even this year, you and I have talked on our grades of like, is Walker young? Is Walker one of the veterans? Like, he hasn't gotten an ample opportunity to just be a young guy and mess up and make those mistakes or go play in the G League. And he probably didn't want to do those things, but they might have benefited him. Bond with Keontae, bond with Bryce, bond with Taylor. Like, go back to that. You are a young guy. You're in your second year in the NBA. Be part of that group. Be a part of that core and figure it out there. Don't worry that you're not as good as Lowry or Colin or John Collins. Like, you're not. You're not supposed to be. So that could be really beneficial for him. I would take that.
I have a question for you on that. Do you think that, I feel like when you look at the rookies, like they're sort of like, okay, we know what you're good at. Go out there and play and try and, play your role well. With Walker, I feel like it's sort of like no one on the Jazz is giving any level of rim protection other than him. So the Jazz rely on him. They're not saying go do you. They rely on him for this. Do you think that plays into it?
Part of it, yeah. I mean, they're asking a lot of him.
Yeah.
And the Jazz they have overextended their young players. That's why I'm not worried about Keontae George at all. They overextended him. They just asked so much of him that he's not capable of doing as a rookie. They're asking him to be a fifth-year player as a rookie. Well, it's stupid.
Yeah.
And that's the Jazz fault, in all honesty. I don't know if it was a mistake, but if you're going to sell low on Keontae because of what he did over the last 30 games, well, he moved up to being the top player on the scouting report as the 16th pick in the draft. Yep. Like, the Spurs didn't even ask Victor to do that his first 30 games until they moved him to center, and then he kicked everyone's butt. It was impressive that Victor was able to do that, but like, Chet Holmgren's not the number one guy in a scouting report. He's third at the absolute highest.
Yeah.
So it's a crazy thing to do. Amen Thompson is not the top player on that scouting report at all. He might be fifth. So the Jazz put Keontae in a point for half the year where he was the top player on the scouting report. Like, that's ridiculous. So, no, I'm not surprised at all that he struggled. And, stop overextending your young players. It's hard on them. And that would be a benefit. And hopefully it pays off in the long run that they say, wow, I've been the number one guy. Being number two is a lot easier. Number three is a lot easier. But you hope you didn't, break them in a way. And I don't think they did. I didn't see that enough. And then they'll look really good at Summer League like we were just talking about and probably get some of that momentum back.
Last piece of news. Danny Ainge and Will Hardy spoke to the media following the end of the season just a couple hours ago. What were your major takeaways from that?
So one of the big ones, speaking of Keontae George, and this got a lot of response, and some of that's probably my fault, but because I quote tweeted it from KSL Sports. If you missed those, go to the KSL Sports Twitter account. You can find a lot of the highlights. I tweeted them out. I'll write a big story on it today as well. But Danny Ainge said, I'm still not sure he's a franchise point guard, speaking of Keontae George. I think he can play point guard, but I think that he can play with another guard playing the point, and he can play off the ball. I thought that was a huge storyline because when the Jazz drafted Keontae last year, I remember Justin Zanuck said, we think he can be a primary ball handler.
Yeah.
And then he opened the season, and remember he was racking up like 10 assists all the time. And then he lost a little bit of that. Whatever it was, he lost a little bit of that. It's not saying he doesn't think he can be a franchise piece. He didn't say that. He said, I don't think I'm not sure he's a franchise point guard. I actually really like that idea from the Jazz is that, hey, we're not going to pigeonhole him into being something just because it's the easy answer. Because in the top 10 of this year's draft, there is Rob Dillingham. There is Reed Shepherd. There is Nikola Topic. There are all these other guards that I don't know if Dillingham's a point guard. He's probably a little bit more like Keontae. But Reed Shepherd, I think, is a point guard.
Yeah.
Nikola Topic is a point guard. If those guys end up as the face of the Jazz, good. Go bring in another point guard and make Keontae's life easier. Let him play off the ball. Let him be a secondary ball handler, not a backup ball handler, but a secondary guard who can, play off the ball and focus a little bit more on scoring and maybe the things he does better than having to run the entire offense, and then let him continue to grow. We have talked a lot about comps for Keontae George. Devin Booker has come up. He's not a true point guard. Jamal Murray has come up. He's a little bit more of a true point guard, but only because you actually have a 7-foot point guard and Nikola Jokic on the team.
Yeah.
So that's fine. That's not a knock on Keontae, I think, at all. I think it's actually a really revealing aspect of what Danny Ainge said, and I don't think it was an insult.
Another quote from Danny Ainge here, and I'm going to tie this into the Keontae quote. We all know that defensively we're not good enough. No question about it. We need to get better personnel and more of an emphasis on that side.
Yeah, they were asked if is it a Will Hardy issue? Is it a coaching issue? And Danny said, it's both. We need to emphasize that more. And Will Hardy talked about needing to figure it out. But yeah, you got to add defensive players.
Yeah. But looking at the Jazz's defensive struggles this year, I think one of the problems was specifically perimeter defense, right? For a lot of the season, it was Colin Sexton and Keontae starting together. Colin gives effort on that end, but he's small, and Keontae's a rookie. You can't expect a lot from a rookie point guard. So do you think that if he were to play the two, if that's what the Jazz are eyeing him for, do you think they expect him to make defensive strides, or maybe they're looking in to bring a defensive-minded point guard?
Both. He's got to get a lot better defensively. He might have been the Jazz worst defensive player this year, which point of attack is the hardest defense in the NBA, and being a rookie guard is one of the hardest positions in the NBA, and then he's overextended on minutes.
Yeah.
So he's tired. He doesn't know how to do it. And he's doing the most difficult job in the league.
Yeah.
Weird.
Recipe
He struggled. Yeah. And that doesn't mean there weren't good guards defensively this year that are young players. They do pop up, and that's something he's going to have to figure out. And maybe he won't be his strength ever. And that will determine how big his second contract is. That's up to Keontae if he wants to really invest on that side of the ball and have it pay off for him. But, yeah, they got to get better. And if you can get a great defensive point guard, that would be awesome. That's where I think the Reed Shepherd name is really interesting. He gets a ton of steals, really smart on the ball. He's not huge, but it opens up that opportunity to go and add other players to complement even what Keontae does. And then Keontae's got to get better. So I thought, that was part of the really interesting aspect of it. Danny Ainge was very revealing.
Yeah.
There's this myth that Danny Ainge is this mystery because he doesn't talk to the media, or he doesn't talk publicly. He talks to the media. You've been to the Jazz games. Danny's standing courtside.
Yep.
He's tall. He's got a white hat on. People don't realize how tall Danny Ainge is.
He's tall.
He stands out.
Yeah.
You know where Danny Ainge is all the time. First of all, he's Danny Ainge. Second of all, he wears a bright white hat, crystal clean or whatever, pristine. And then he's 6'4", 6'5".
Yeah.
So he's really easy to find. And he will talk to you. So this idea that Danny Ainge is some mystery is not true. He just doesn't talk with microphones in front of him a whole lot. But as candid as he was today, I think is not actually all that uncommon. So he was revealing. I would highly advise going and listening to it. You can find it on the Jake and Ben podcast. We'll have it at the podcast at KSL Sports as well. We will have that up if you missed it. Highly, highly, highly recommend it to you. It's going to be, along with the Jazz Notes podcast, the best information you get this offseason. All right, let's take a quick break. We can come back. We can talk about some important dates coming up this offseason, and we'll get to your mailbag as well. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt. Hey, Chandler, really quick, I want to touch on one more thing Danny Ainge said, because it ties to our offseason. That's where we're going to get to here in the second half of this podcast. Talking about plans, which has been a big comment from Jazz fans of wanting a plan. What's the plan? There's no plan. They're just winging it. It's kind of. Yeah, they kind of are. And here's what Danny Ainge said, and here I want to elaborate on that. He says, everybody wants this plan, including Ryan Smith. Ryan loves a plan. He's a tech guy. He's got a plan. I wish basketball worked that way. I wish we could just organize the plan. We're going to draft this guy in the future. We're going to trade for this guy in the future. But that's not how basketball works. That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's not.
That's exactly right. And that's why I understand why Jazz fans want a plan or want to know when things are going to get better. Danny Ainge talked about losing 19 games in a row at Boston, and they were going to go out there and they were going to tank and try and get Kevin Durant with the number 2 overall pick or whoever was going to be there for them. And they slipped to 5.
Yep.
Well, that was the draft that they ended up taking that 5th pick that turned into Jeff Green. They traded for Ray Allen, and they traded for Kevin Garnett that same offseason. They won a title that first year. You can have a plan, and then things will change because the plan doesn't work in your favor. The Jazz have a plan to do with the 8th pick and how they're going to approach it. If it ends up at number 1, it changes the plan.
Yep.
If the Milwaukee Bucks come calling the Jazz this offseason and be like, we hate Damian Lillard. We hate him. John Collins, straight up, and salary match. We just got to get rid of him.
Yeah.
We're not expecting picks. No one's going to give us picks for him. We can't pay him this money for the rest of the year. The Jazz plan will change, and you just got to be ready to plan. Now, I'm not saying the Jazz want Damian Lillard. Maybe he's washed. But, plans change quickly. You can't make the plan for who's going to be available in the draft and whether you're going to win the lottery, et cetera. I thought that was a good point from Danny Ainge that I think I've tried to convey a lot for people asking for the plan, but Danny said it a lot more concisely and better than I can.
Yeah, in basketball, you can't make a long-term plan. You can have a plan with who you're going to draft here or who you're going to target in the next offseason, but you can't say we're going to do this, and then win a title. It just doesn't work like that. Like, for example, for the Bucks, it wasn't their plan to turn Giannis Antetokounmpo into debatably the best player of this decade and then win a title off of him. They were like, okay, we're going to draft this project. Maybe he can turn out to be a top 3 player for our team. Like, who knows? It never really works out exactly how you expect. Like, for all we know, the Jazz can jump up to the 3rd pick.
Yeah.
And they were eyeing Buzelis at 9, but now they're going to look at someone totally different.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that was a great quote from him, and it's sort of tempering expectations because there shouldn't be expectations.
Stay flexible.
Yes.
That's what the Jazz are doing. And then hoping to get some luck along the way, and that's how every team is built. Find a team out there that doesn't have luck of how they are a championship contender, like the Lakers. Okay, well, you're not the Lakers.
Yeah.
And guess what? The only reason the Lakers are good is because they accidentally got Austin Reeves. Like, if they didn't have Austin Reeves, things would look totally different. And they're going to trade Austin Reeves for Trae Young this offseason. Like, that's luck. That's the luck they had to have. And maybe they don't even get it, and then the luck isn't there for them. So, anyways, regardless. All right, let's move on. Do we want to get into just some off-season dates really quick? I know I touched on that just to keep an eye on. It's a little minutiae, but just to give you a plan of what is happening for the Jazz coming up in the off-season. The first thing to note is that the NBA has to do the tiebreaker for the 28th or the 29th pick that they're getting from Oklahoma City. Usually they do it a couple of days after the end of the regular season. They're busy with the play-in tournament. Last year, I want to say they did it on the 17th, and actually the season ended on the 9th last year. So It might be as much as next year, or next week, I should say, before they do that tiebreaker. I couldn't find an exact date on it. Draft lottery coming up on May 12th, Combine the 12th to the 19th, and then the NBA draft, remember, 2 days, 26th and the 27th. That's kind of the immediate future of what's coming up for the Jazz. That's what the next 2 months are going to be about.
Yep, and then late June to early July, specifically June 29th to July 6th, that's when the free agency period sort of comes about. Salt Lake City Summer League, July 8th to 10th, and then Las Vegas Summer League, 12th to 22nd.
Yeah, so excited to watch that. End of June, early July, going to be very busy, and then a lot of draft stuff leading up to that. Quickly, free agents, guys who may or may not be on the roster next year. Talen Horton-Tucker, unrestricted free agent, back or not back?
Not back.
Not back. I agree with you. Chris Dunn, unrestricted free agent, back, not back?
I'm 50-50 on that. I could see either way.
I think the Jazz would welcome him back.
Yes.
I think the Jazz would welcome back a more dynamic player, but if they want to be a good defensive team, Chris Dunn plays defense, and he knows the team, and he's still within like the age group of how they want to play. He's not 35.
Yeah.
Danny Ainge, one of the things he said today is no dinosaurs. He doesn't want any dinosaurs on the team. Chris Dunn is no dinosaur and would probably come on the cheap, but he also may want to go play for a contender. And there are teams out there like, Philly, the Lakers, that might consider themselves close and don't have a lot of money, but could sign a minimum point guard. Jazz can give more money than that, but like I said, he's unrestricted. Luka Šamanić, unrestricted, back or not?
I'm going to say back.
I think he's not.
Okay.
They didn't mention him on the Summer League.
Oh, true.
I will say that. If Danny wanted him back, he would have brought him back. He did mention Johnny Juzang, and he said Johnny Juzang is an NBA player. That was revealing.
Yeah.
I think the Jazz, and he's a restricted free agent, so he'll be back. Micah Potter, his two-way contract ends. Same with Johnny Juzang. When you're a two-way player, when your contract expires, you're automatically restricted.
Okay.
Micah Potter, back or not back?
I'll say back for him.
I think the Jazz are just so young.
Yeah.
I think they might cast him off. I'm going to say not back for Micah Potter. Omer Yurtseven, non-guaranteed. His full guarantee date isn't until January. He's like totally harmless.
Mm-hmm.
Nice guy. He's every backup center in the NBA.
Gentle
you can
giant.
replace him like Jeff Withey was Omer Yurtseven. Hassan Whiteside was Omer. It was a better version, but like is Omer Yurtseven. Like backup 7-footers who do exactly that are a dime a dozen, unfortunately. But he's already here.
Yeah.
He's under contract. If they want to keep him, they sign him for a non-guaranteed 2-year deal. Back, not back.
It's hard to say because, like you said, he's so replaceable, for lack of a better term. I'm going to say I'll say back.
I'm going to say back as well,
Yeah.
just to have a little continuity. Kenneth Lofton Jr., non-guaranteed, but on a 3-year deal. Back for sure. Darius Baisley, does he make opening night roster next year for the Jazz?
I'm going to say no.
I kind of think no also, but he was thrown into, again, an impossible situation where doesn't know the team at all. They're not drawing up plays for him or anything. Like, Kenneth Lofton actually got to do Kenneth Lofton stuff. They just gave him the ball a bunch and let him operate, let him cook. Darius Baisley's not that type of player. So I would say 50-50. I would probably lean towards no just because roster spots are really hard to get.
Mm-hmm.
But close 51-49, he's not back. Not 90-10 or 95-10 in the case of Talen Horton-Tucker, where he's certainly not going to be back next season. All right, what do we want to get into next?
Postseason awards, and we can kind of go through these kind of quick because I feel like most of them are more or less kind of obvious. First up, MVP.
Larry Markkinen.
I will tell you, I was so close to picking Colin Sexton. One, because he had amazing numbers, basically 18, 19, and 5, and played 78 games. Markkinen only hit the 55 mark.
Yep, and wanted to play all 82, got sick late in the season, and they, I think, rested him on purpose late because they didn't want to accidentally beat the Warriors. If that game didn't matter, I wouldn't be surprised if he had played against the Warriors. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the game mattered in the standings, so he didn't play. But yeah, Lowry's the Jazz best player. They're so much better when he's on the floor. They need Lowry back and to play as many games as possible next season. And Lowry understood that, yes, while he had a shoulder injury, it's not like he was walking around in a cast after the season. We knew what was going on. That was a tank late in the season by the Utah Jazz. So they wanted him to sit out so they could lose games, and they did it. And that's why Lowry's the Jazz best player. And there's a reason they let Colin play.
Yep.
Because he was not going to accidentally win them too many games when he was on the floor.
Next up, Defensive Player of the Year. I had Walker Kessler. He had the best defensive rating of all players with more than 50 games played at 116. 2.4 blocks per game, which was second in the NBA, although he was not even close to where Victor was at 3.6. And also, interesting stat, he was the 99th percentile in block percentage, which is percentage of opposing shot attempts blocked.
He's a top 5 defensive player at the rim still in the NBA, and he didn't play a whole lot. I wish he was a better rebounder. Some of that's just effort.
Yep.
But he is by far the Jazz best defensive specialist. Chris Dunn is in this conversation as well, but you just can't make that big of an impact as a guard compared to a center in the NBA. This might be a Victor Wembanyama, Rudy Gobert situation where Victor said, Rudy, I know it's yours this year, but next year it's mine, and I'm going to say Taylor Hendricks.
Okay.
I think Taylor might be the guy next year. Will Hardy has talked a lot about his technique, and I think that's absolutely right. Also, he's just pretty freakish.
Yeah.
He's blocked. We all know the KD block, but he blocked a Klay Thompson jump shot. He blocked a Chris Paul runner. Shots that are hard to block that not everyone blocks that you're like, oh, I've not seen many people on the planet ever do that before. So I think you hope it's Kessler next year because it's the more important position. But it would be nice if Taylor jumped up and made a Jonathan Isaac run at it and said, yeah, I'm a difference maker. We will see.
Next up, most improved player. My pick was my preseason pick, which is Colin Sexton. He put up 18.7 points, 4.9 assists on basically 49, 39, 86. Last year, 14 and 3, basically.
Yeah.
So had a pretty solid jump.
Absolutely. I don't think there's any conversation there. And it's kind of funny because actually his numbers are so similar to what he was last year. Mm-hmm. But low-key, even though he didn't play for the Jazz, kind of a good season for John Collins.
True.
Sneaky good year for John Collins. 37% from 3. Remember, he was under 30 last year. That's kind of the key to him being totally unplayable versus playable. Mm-hmm. And he was playable.
Yes.
He's got to get better. And then the other answer, had he played the whole season, would have been Simone.
Yeah.
Simone went from being we didn't know if he's an NBA player to dude's going to sign a $30 million contract this offseason. That's bananas. And Colin just kind of got back to who he was.
True.
So I'm going to give it to Colin. Stayed with the team the whole year. I'm not going to give it to a Detroit Pistons player, unfortunately. But Simone would have been number 2. And then good bounce back year. Maybe comeback player of the year for John Collins, even though there's a lot of work there still yet to be done.
Next up, Rookie of the Year. We can just say the name here. Keontae George.
George.
He had his rough spell, but overall a pretty solid rookie year. Next up, Sixth Man of the Year. Who do you have for this?
Got to be Colin again.
Again?
Yeah, Colin was the Jazz best player. Though, yeah, we'll just say that. I'll have a story coming out about Jordan Clarkson and some of his goals before the end of his career, which I thought were interesting. But, Colin Sexton.
I had Walker Kessler there. Next up, Clutch Player of the Year.
You had Colin Walker Kessler as your Sixth Man of the Year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wish he had played more.
True.
That was the only problem. But yeah, he only started 22 games, and Colin Sexton started 51 of the Jazz 78 games. He probably, he wouldn't qualify as the sixth man. So maybe that's not fair. Yeah, maybe it does have to be Walker, which, man, that is such a bad sign.
Yeah. Basically 8, 7.5. Those were his stats.
Yeah, he probably was the sixth man of the year for the Jazz, was Walker, and it was a disappointment on basically all fronts this year. So, yeah. Collins started too many games. I didn't realize he started 51 games, but he started the whole second half of the season. It's got to be Walker. Yeah.
Clutch player of the year. I'm between Markkanen and Clarkson here. I'll give you the stats. Markkanen played in 22 clutch games. Clarkson played in 19. Clarkson was the points leader at 2.9 points in the clutch. Markkanen at 2.3, but Markkanen was significantly more efficient. And I think clutchness is pretty well based in efficiency.
Absolutely. What are Keontae George's clutch numbers? Do you have those pulled up?
I do not have them up.
I was just looking at the fourth quarter, which, look, the Jazz weren't in that many close games because they were getting blown out once Keontae George started playing a lot. And look, that's on him. I mean, one of the reasons they were getting blown out is because his plus-minus was terrible all year. That's not great. But his fourth quarter numbers were kind of promising this year. I'll pull them up quickly for the Jazz. Specifically his field goal percentage, which took a major leap forward. Shot 42% from the floor again. He was under, 36% on the season? Or under 39%, excuse me. So he's up over 42. Then his three-point shooting in the fourth quarter was 39%.
Wow.
Those are good numbers.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when the games probably mattered a little bit. Now, some of it was when the games really didn't matter, and he would tack on 6 points and with 2 minutes to play in the fourth quarter of a blowout, and some of that doesn't matter, so it might be a little jaded, but there were some moments where I was actually pretty impressed with Keontae in big minutes, like against Miami. He did it against the Clippers. No, it wasn't the Clippers. It was the game before that, where he hit some big shots in the fourth quarter. He had some nice fourth quarters, and there was a Golden State game here that the Jazz won, I think right around Christmas, where he looked really good. Yep. So he had some promising fourth quarters that I bought into. But I'd give it to Lowry.
You want to get into the mailbag?
Yeah, let's do it. As always, I send out questions on Twitter, at KSL Sports, at Ben's Hoops, at Chandler Holt KSL. I do it at about 11 o'clock every Tuesday, and you can respond with your mailbag questions, and then I address them in an article after, as well as right here on the episode.
Okay, first up, also, we have some NHL questions thrown in here as well.
Okay.
We'll do one of those first. Does Ryan Smith already have a team name he wants to use for the NHL team?
Not that I've heard.
Yes.
I've talked to some sources about it, and not necessarily didn't ask about the name, but a lot of the information I was told, name was not one of them. Now, do I think he does? I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me tell you the truth. I think he does. I don't know it. If I did, I would tell you. I think the Yetis has a really strong chance to be the name, but then again, that just might be the front runner. That is the only name he has mentioned publicly. I think he said it on the Pat McAfee show that he liked the Utah Yetis. It had the U for Utah, University of Utah, Y for BYU, the UY. It's kind of tied in there. That would make a lot of sense. And you know what? The new expansion teams have kind of been these mythical figures, right? The Kraken. I don't know what a Golden Knight is, but it's like it kind of seems like a mythical thing. It's mountainous. It's wintry. That would match. I like the Arches. You could use the arch in Moab as the kind of logo. You could do that, put a hockey net behind it. I thought that would be pretty cool. But they'll figure something out. And you know what? Fans are going to hate it.
True, no matter what.
Yeah, right. Like half the people are going to like it, and half the people are going to tell them they're morons, and we'll move on.
Honestly, that was something interesting. When he first mentioned the Yeti name on the Pat McAfee show, I felt like it was a really good response to it. Like a lot of people were like, oh yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then now it's sort of like I've seen like a lot of 50-50 on it.
Because it's the name we've heard the most.
Yes.
And people just want new, shiny all the time. It's like, well, I have bad news for you. This is going to be the team's name, hopefully for 100 years.
Yes.
Hopefully they're here forever. But, people are going to be mad, and then they'll get over it. I mean, the Jazz, again, just doesn't make any sense in Utah. I would never trade the Jazz name.
Yeah.
It's the best. It might be the best name in basketball. Jazz is awesome. It makes sense of how basketball looks. It's kind of impromptu. Has nothing to do with the state.
Yep.
But I would never give it up for anything.
That question was from Chalupa Cabra, by the way. Next one from Jake the Lynx. Danny Ainge said that they were very close to trading for a franchise-level player before in the rebuild. Any guesses who or what type or level of player it might have been that the front office is going for?
I'd also heard that the Jazz thought they had a deal done or were very close. I think it was Drew Holiday.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Yeah.
That's my guess. I promise you there's no intel there. But looking at guys who moved from Portland, we know the Jazz got in on that conversation. They also pursued Dame, though.
Yep.
But my guess was Drew, and I bet you the Jazz kind of got a little bit close to that.
So do you think that, like he also said they were big game hunting in the press conference earlier, do you think that it was like point guard or bust?
No.
Okay.
No, I think they are open for stars.
Okay.
They are open for whoever's going to improve the team. And Danny Ainge likes stars. Danny Ainge likes difference makers. And that's, he kind of opened his presser today. He was a little salty. And then he really loosened up a little bit. But he was like, yeah, we just need better players. Like, we just got to get better. And that is his job. And I think that's maybe why he's a little salty about it. It's like, yeah, I've got to do a better job at getting these guys, and they're not going to do it just to do it. And he said that. We're not going to throw all of our chips in for no reason just to do it. But they are always on the lookout for stars to become available, and they will pay what they have to when those guys become available to make sure they land in Utah. But that would be kind of the name that we have heard. Makes sense with the timeline, makes sense with the need that he was that type of guy. And you know what's so interesting? Like, they could have really overpaid for Damian Lillard last year, and you wait a year and maybe you get him at a much lower price. Like, there's a lot going on with Dame. It's not just that he's a bad fit in Milwaukee, and maybe that is true. But, like, he got divorced last year. He's talked about how, like, bored he is and lonely. Like, maybe he comes back to Utah and he has people from his time at Weber State, and he's like a rejuvenized player in a smaller market and isn't expected to win a title right away. And maybe that, you know, if that were to come available, I'm not sure I'd want to pay him $60 million in a couple of seasons. But, again, there's all these little different define big game hunting could mean a lot of things.
Yeah. Next up from Glenn Anderson, should the Jazz tank next summer for Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey? If the answer is yes, would we have to trade Lowry? Is there any way to do both?
The answer is probably yes, unless you hope to finish with the 8th worst record again and win the lottery. I don't see it happening. And it doesn't mean the Jazz are going to be out of the lottery next year, but the problem is, again, if you're 11-14, your pick goes to Oklahoma City in a much better draft. So either be bad or make the playoffs. And I'm not sure which one. Probably more likely they're going to be bad.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think they're going to trade Lowry, so I wouldn't expect that.
Next up from James McKinney, I keep hearing that the Jazz are open to the possibility of making a big trade this offseason. Why not trade for Zion Williamson? How good would our team be with him alongside Markkanen?
I am pro Zion. There are 5 players in the NBA that make a difference physically. I've talked about this a lot. Victor Wembanyama. I think LeBron, even though at this point of his career it's kind of trailing off a little bit. You know, Anthony Edwards' athleticism is a difference maker on the floor.
Yes.
Zion's in that conversation.
Definitely.
He is so strong and so athletic. He's not even as athletic as he was coming out of Duke because of the injuries, but he is such a unique player. I should put Luke on this group because he's 6'9", and people don't realize how huge he is.
And just strong.
Strong. Yeah, he's a bull. But Zion is so freakishly athletic. Joel is in this conversation as well. And so powerful that he can be a difference maker. It's also such a huge red flag that every big game he's terrible.
Yep.
Like the play-in tournament, terrible. We'll see what he does in the play-in tournament tonight against the Lakers. I expect him to be terrible. He has big games every once in a while. If you could buy him really low, I just don't think New Orleans is selling him at a low price yet. But if you could buy low, I would say, yeah, go ahead. But I wouldn't put like 3 draft picks, Taylor Hendricks, and a salary match in there. Like, I would never do that. I would save that for a much better player.
And honestly, if there's any like front court mate to go alongside Zion, I feel like Lauri Markkanen would be like, I can't think of a better one in the NBA.
They'd be nice. I wish Zion rebounded. I know I talked too much about rebounding on this podcast, but like, he doesn't rebound. Yeah. He is one of the worst rebounders. He's one of the worst defensive players in the NBA. For his tools, as good as he could be, he's awful. He averages 5.8 rebounds a game. It's like, so does Josh Hart. You know, like, ugh. Zion is so unique. You got to really kind of build around him. And I like Zion. Again, his talent is through the roof. I wish he played better in big games. And it's still hilarious because his career averages are 25 points a game. It's like, he's not a bust. He's just not LeBron. Like everyone was saying, he's the best draft pick since LeBron before Wemby came around. Yeah. So, you got to be careful. You never know what guys are going to turn into. And remember after his rookie season, I know he got hurt a lot. But after his first year in the NBA, they were like, yeah, this dude's, he's the real deal. Like, he's going to be a star of the NBA. And he never turned out to, that never came to fruition.
Yeah.
Made an all-star his second year, only played 61 games. That was the year after, so it was 60 of 71 after the pandemic. Didn't play his third season. Really out of shape last year. And then played 70 games this year. So I'm rooting for his health. And maybe he just needs another season fully removed from injury to become the guy. And you know what? That worked for Colin Sexton. Colin Sexton needed to get a year away from his knee injury to bounce back to being a 20-point-per-game scorer this year. Maybe next year Zion's going to be unbelievable. I'm rooting for him.
Yeah, but I feel like the biggest problem with that trade would be the defense in the front court. Next up from Crunch Factor, seems like Kenny Lofton can fill the vacuum on the Jazz roster for playmaking/passing, especially from the front court. What are his chances of being part of the rotation next year, and what does he need to improve on?
I would say rotation low, but he does a lot of the same things that Kelly Olynyk did. Now, he's not a three-point shooter as well as Kelly was. He didn't hit many threes. He shot some threes this year. He didn't hit many. And that's really still Kelly's biggest strength, is that he was a big guy who stretched the floor. And as simple as that is, and as annoying as that is, like, making shots matters. So I don't know if he's a rotation player, But again, I think he could make the roster and you give him a chance. But, you're far more invested in Taylor Hendricks and Walker Kessler even still next year. But I would bring him back. You've got him on a cheap deal. I'd bring him back, give him another year. And if you have to cut him after that, fine. Or cut him midseason, fine. But, yeah, that he processes the game at such an elite level, maybe better than anyone else in the front court for the Jazz right now, including Lauri Markkanen. His reads are really good. His touch is great. There's just a lot you could do with him if you're willing to lean into it.
Next up from Craig Wilson. Phoenix, Milwaukee, Miami, the Lakers, and others are in the first or second apron. Their draft picks will cost as much as top 4 lottery picks with the tax penalties, plus bad draft. Can the Jazz get those picks on the cheap? What would it cost, and would they consider it since it is being labeled as a bad draft?
Jazz don't need any more draft picks.
True.
What I would look at is all of those teams' players that you could pry off of them more than their draft picks. Because actually their draft picks are what they need, right? Young players under team control that you can have for 7 seasons and you can keep paying them. So yes, they hurt your salary cap, don't get me wrong, but it's more about the ability that you're already going to have to pay somebody. You might as well have some young players that have a chance to break out at a specific cost that can jump through. I would be more looking at players on their rosters that, they have to get rid of. Phoenix probably doesn't have any, in all honesty. You don't want Royce O'Neal. You've had Royce O'Neal. Grayson Allen's good. I like Grayson Allen. They just signed him to a 4-year deal, and maybe that's the type of player you could trade for, and we know he started his career here. And actually, 4 years, $70 million is a pretty good price for Grayson Allen. Again, he's kind of got some defensive issues. I don't know if he fits what the Jazz are doing, but we talked about Damian Lillard. Chris Middleton's probably a little bit too old. Brook Lopez is definitely too old, but are there other young players on Milwaukee that they'd want to get rid of? Maybe. There are guys on Miami, you would take Duncan Robinson off their hands. I think you would. He's a great shooter. Lakers, yeah. If they need to dump Austin Reeves in a 3-player trade to get Trae Young back, yeah, be there. Be available to take some of those guys off their hands. More likely the players than the draft picks. And the Jazz don't need more draft picks.
Next up from Jazz Time Jones. The Jazz don't look like they will be in the playoffs in 2025. Rather than get the 9th pick again, do they tank? This is interesting because like we talked about with Lauri Markkanen on the roster, and you also look at some other pieces who can help you get wins, I don't think the Jazz can be in contention for the worst team in the league.
And the Jazz don't think that. I've talked to them specifically. They do not think they can become the worst team in the NBA.
And also looking at the teams who finished worse than the Jazz this year, I think it's pretty safe to say that Detroit, Washington, Portland, Charlotte, that's 4 that are, I would say, guaranteed to be worse than the Jazz again. You can argue that maybe Toronto or San Antonio can jump the Jazz.
But Atlanta could be worse than the Jazz. Chicago could be worse than the Jazz next year. Brooklyn might blow it up this offseason.
Yep.
So, yeah, there are a lot of teams that could still get worse than the Jazz.
Do you think that they should tank?
No.
Yes. I agree.
If they were going to tank, they should have done it last year.
Mm-hmm.
And gone all out for Victor. And if you didn't get him, you would have been in trouble. This is the truth. Maybe Brandon Miller would have been the difference maker in the franchise piece, but do we think Brandon Miller's going to be better than Lowry? Maybe. How long from now? 3 years from now? 4 years from now? The Jazz aren't in the spot, and Danny Ainge said this today, they're not in a spot to be 3 years out anymore. It's kind of the hard part of rebuilding around a rookie. Even this year, if they get the number 1 pick this year, Sarr or Raiche or whatever this kid's name is, they're not building around that player unless that kid really jumps out like gangbusters, and that's just going to be a piece of the puzzle, which is fine. Good. Be good and then add a piece to the puzzle, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the person you build around, and I don't see them doing that for Ace Bailey or Cooper Flagg next year.
Last question here from Pat Freedom Eagle. Why are we not worried that Keontae shot 39.1% from the floor and 33.4% from 3? I have something from this. We were talking about Keontae comps earlier. You mentioned Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray is a championship-level point guard proven.
Yep.
In his rookie year, he shot 40.4% from the floor, which is exactly 1% higher than Keontae, and he shot 33.4% from 3. The exact same.
Yeah. Look, I get it. I'm not saying not possible, but Kemba Walker was 36% from the floor and 30% from 3 his rookie year. Well, Kemba was awesome. If Keontae George is Kemba Walker good, okay. Yeah, you've got a franchise face. He was a really, really high-level player. You could go way back and look at Jason Kidd's first year. And Jason Kidd turned into one of the best three-point shooters in the NBA for a long time. Mo Williams, really good player, started with the Jazz, did not shoot well at all his rookie season and kind of turned into a scoring guard. In fact, had a 50-point game in his career. So I actually don't buy that idea that you can't turn into a player. Miles McBride has turned into a good player for the Knicks. It's over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But Miles McBride is fine. He can play. Lou Dort's fine. Now he's not a great shooter and he's a much better defensive player, but you found a way to make that work. Shake Milton's a good NBA player. Duncan Robinson is in the conversation for the best shooter in the world. He shot 39% from the floor his first year and 28% from three.
Mm-hmm.
Duncan Robinson.
Yeah.
It's all he does is a great shooter. That's how he was in the NBA. He's got like an $80 million contract for being a great shooter. So I just don't buy the idea that there aren't comps.
No. Yeah.
For guards that can turn into good players. And I know that Duncan Robinson's not a guard, but like shooting you can improve.
Yes.
This used to be a thing in the NBA where this is kind of a new technology almost of like you can't fix a guy's jump shot. And Jason Kidd was like, well, don't compare anyone to Jason Kidd. He's the only player who's ever improved his jump shot. Look at every player in the NBA now. Like the entire New Orleans Pelicans roster is a good three-point shooting team. None of them could shoot coming into the NBA.
Yeah.
None of the Herb Jones couldn't shoot a lick. Now he's awesome. He's shooting 40% from three. Like this is pretty common actually to improve guys' jump shots. Lonzo Ball turned into a great shooter before he got hurt. Lonzo's first year in the NBA, 36% from the floor, 30% from three. Okay. Okay, I'm not worried about his percentages in the slightest. I'm actually a little bit more worried about his turnovers maybe.
Yep.
And he needs to shoot better. It's not like if he stays at this level, he's fine. It's not fine. It's got to get better. But there's a ton of evidence and recent evidence that guards get better shooting the ball, and I would expect Keontae to get there.
But yeah, I would not be worried for two reasons. One, near the end of the year when he was playing probably most of his minutes, he was the defensive focal point for the other team, right? Like we said, he moved from maybe like third, fourth, fifth on the scouting report to number one with Laurie, Clarkson, and all these other dudes out. And then also like the two main things that even specifically rookie point guards struggle with is defense and efficiency. Like, of course, you're going to have outliers like Kyrie Irving, who's been a 50, 40, 90 guy his entire career, but that's
outliers,
just,
like you said.
Exactly.
So no, there are red flags with Keontae. Terrible defensive player. Turnovers are high. Some of the effort on just like running back on defense. But like, what I'm not worried about is his scoring.
Yeah.
Again, I don't worry about it that much. And it's why his playmaking early in the season was so like, oh, there might be a guy here because I know he's going to be able to score. And he had 4 30-point games this year or something like that. Like a bunch of games over 25 points. Like that remains a not major problem for me. And he's got to do less. But that's on the Jazz too. It's like, don't make him the be everything guy. Don't make him the number one scoring option and the top playmaker at 19 years old or 20 years old, having never done that. And Danny Ainge mentioned today he played small forward at Baylor last year. Like that's how new this is for him.
Yeah.
So he'll figure it out.
Thank you guys for tuning into the Jazz Notes podcast. We will not be recording next week, but the following week we're going to come back and do some more season review, individual player things.
And hopefully have some draft breakdown, get back to your mailbag. So appreciate everybody listening all year. You really have made this fun. The mailbag interaction is the best part of this, and it makes me better at my job, honestly. So I really appreciate everyone who follows along and listens. Chandler, thank you for doing this all year. I know this was your first jump into podcasting like this, but you've been great. So appreciate you doing that. Subscribe, like us, follow us on Twitter at Ben's Hoops, at Chandler Holt KSL. Read us at KSLSports.com, and we'll be back in 2 weeks.